What if the place where an entire generation learned how to shop, socialize, and dream could simply disappear? What if America's most powerful shopping mall, once bursting with life, music, and movement, ended its story in silence and dust? As you listen, think about this question and share your thoughts in the comments, because this story is not just about a building, it is about an era. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write a comment about malls you remember from your own life. Your experiences are part of this history too. In the mid-1970s, the United States was still riding the momentum of post-war optimism. Suburbs were expanding outward, highways were stretching farther, and the American middle class believed deeply in growth without limits. Shopping malls were no longer just places to buy things. They were climate-controlled cities, safe, clean, and designed to gather families, teenagers, and workers under one massive roof. In this environment of confidence and ambition, a bold idea took shape in North Randall, Ohio. In 1976, Randall Park Mall opened its doors with a promise unlike any other. It was designed to be the largest enclosed shopping mall in America, a statement of dominance in retail and architecture. Developed by Edward J. DeBartolo Sr., a businessman known for his grand visions and aggressive expansion, the mall was meant to symbolize the future of consumption. Size was its primary weapon. With more than 200 stores, long futuristic corridors, indoor fountains, and vast common areas, Randall Park Mall was not subtle. It was overwhelming by design. Major anchor stores defined its identity. Sears, JCPenney, and Higbee's acted as pillars, drawing massive crowds day after day. Smaller shops thrived in their orbit, selling clothes, electronics, music, jewelry, and food that reflected the tastes of late 20th century America. The mall was carefully engineered to keep people inside for hours. Escalators moved constantly, lights were bright, and the sound of footsteps echoed endlessly across polished floors. But Randall Park Mall was more than a commercial machine. It quickly became the social heart of the region. Teenagers gathered after school, families spent entire weekends walking its corridors, and elderly residents used it as a safe place to exercise during Ohio's harsh winters. Jobs were plentiful. Thousands of people depended on the mall for their livelihood, from retail workers to maintenance staff and security guards. Money flowed through the building at a staggering pace, reinforcing the idea that this empire would last forever. During the 1980s, the mall reached its peak. This was the golden age of American retail capitalism, and Randall Park Mall stood as one of its most powerful symbols. Sales numbers were enormous, foot traffic was constant, and success seemed self-sustaining. The mall reflected a broader belief in endless suburban growth, where prosperity moved outward from city centers and left behind older industrial neighborhoods. Few questioned whether this system could collapse, because from the inside, everything appeared stable. Yet beneath the surface, the forces that would eventually undo Randall Park Mall were already in motion. The same suburban expansion that fed its early success continued pushing farther away. Newer, more modern malls began to appear, closer to wealthier neighborhoods. At the same time, Ohio's industrial backbone started to crack. Factories closed, steel jobs vanished, and entire communities lost their economic foundation. As jobs disappeared, so did disposable income, and the mall felt the first subtle shifts in its once unstoppable momentum. Perceptions also began to change. As demographics shifted and economic stress increased, fear quietly entered the conversation. Some shoppers chose newer malls they believed were safer or more fashionable. Retail follows confidence, and confidence was slowly leaking out of Randall Park Mall. Store by store, small changes accumulated, almost unnoticed at first, like lights dimming one by one in a massive room. By the end of the 1980s, the empire still stood tall, but cracks were forming in its foundation. The corridors were just as long, the fountains still flowed, and the anchors remained open, yet something had changed. The question was no longer how big Randall Park Mall could become, but whether size alone was enough to keep it alive. And as the next decade approached, that question would grow impossible to ignore. As the 1990s arrived, the world outside Randall Park Mall was changing faster than the building itself could adapt. American retail was entering a new phase, one driven by constant novelty, aesthetic upgrades, and an obsession with reinvention. New shopping centers were no longer just large, they were themed, polished, and strategically positioned closer to expanding suburban wealth. Randall Park Mall, once the future, was quietly becoming a relic of an earlier vision. Competition intensified. Newer malls offered brighter designs, updated food courts, and a sense of prestige that Randall Park Mall struggled to match. Shoppers began choosing destinations not only based on convenience but on perception. Where did people feel comfortable? Where did they feel represented? These questions, often unspoken, carried enormous economic weight. Foot traffic started to thin, first during weekdays, then on weekends. What once felt crowded now felt merely busy, and eventually just adequate. Anchor stores remained open, but even they were under pressure. Department stores across the country were facing declining sales, squeezed between discount retailers on one side and specialty boutiques on the other. Inside Randall Park Mall, smaller stores began to rotate more frequently. A shop would open, struggle, and quietly close within a year. Another would take its place, hoping for a turnaround that rarely came. Each closure left behind a vacant storefront, covered windows, and a sense of unease. The mall's vast size, once its greatest advantage, was becoming a liability. Long corridors that once echoed with voices now amplified emptiness. Escalators were occasionally shut down to reduce operating costs. Maintenance was delayed. Subtle signs of decline accumulated, and regular visitors noticed them. How long can a place built on constant motion survive when movement slows? Outside the mall, North Randall itself was facing mounting challenges. The collapse of Ohio's industrial economy hit surrounding communities hard. Unemployment rose, public resources shrank, and economic optimism faded. As income levels dropped, so did discretionary spending. Malls depend on surplus money, on the idea that after necessities are covered, there is still room for desire. When that surplus disappears, retail spaces begin to suffocate. Perception of crime, whether statistically accurate or not, also played a critical role. News stories, rumors, and word of mouth reshaped how people viewed the mall. Families who once spent entire afternoons there started choosing other destinations. Retailers are acutely sensitive to these shifts. As customer demographics changed, some brands decided Randall Park Mall no longer fit their image. When they left, others followed. By the late 1990s, the decline was undeniable. Large sections of the mall felt hollow. Food court options shrank. National chains replaced by local businesses struggled to survive without consistent foot traffic. The mall still functioned, still opened its doors each morning, but it no longer felt like the center of anything. It had become a place people passed through, not a destination they sought out. Ownership and management faced a difficult dilemma. Revitalization required massive investment, but confidence in the mall's future was fading. Renovations were discussed, plans drafted, promises made, yet few were fully realized. In retail, hesitation can be fatal. While Randall Park Mall waited, the world moved on. As the new millennium approached, another force was quietly reshaping consumer behavior. Computers entered homes. Internet connections became faster and more accessible. At first, online shopping seemed like a novelty, something peripheral to the real experience of retail. But change rarely announces itself loudly at the beginning. It creeps in unnoticed until it is too late to stop. Standing inside Randall Park Mall at this time felt like standing inside a memory that had not yet realized it was one. The structure was still there, massive and imposing, but its purpose was slipping away. The question lingered in the air, unanswered and uncomfortable. Could this giant adapt, or was it already too late? The early 2000s marked the beginning of the end. What had once been a slow decline now accelerated into a visible unraveling. Online commerce was no longer a curiosity, it was becoming a habit. Shoppers discovered the convenience of buying without driving, without parking, without walking endless corridors. For a mall already struggling to maintain relevance, this shift was devastating. Inside Randall Park Mall, closures multiplied. Storefronts went dark one after another, creating long stretches of metal gates and empty glass. The remaining retailers were clustered together, shrinking the functional footprint of the mall as entire wings became nearly abandoned. Walking through the building felt disorienting. Familiar routes led to silence. The sounds that once defined the space were gone. Anchor stores, the pillars that had held the mall together for decades, began to fall. When an anchor leaves, it does more than remove a tenant. It removes gravity. Without those massive brands pulling customers inside, smaller stores had little chance of survival. Each anchor closure sent shockwaves through the remaining ecosystem. accelerating departures and eroding confidence even further. Operating costs remained enormous. Heating, lighting, security, and maintenance for such a vast structure required constant spending, regardless of how many stores were open. As revenue dropped, compromises were made. Lights were dimmed, sections were closed off, escalators stood frozen, locked in place like artifacts from a different era. The mall was no longer designed for comfort, but for survival. The emotional impact of the decline was profound. Employees who had spent decades working inside the mall watched their workplace decay around them. Longtime shoppers returned out of nostalgia, only to find the spaces of their youth transformed into empty shells. There is a particular kind of sadness that comes from watching a place outlive its purpose while still standing. Attempts at reinvention continued, but none gained traction. Proposals ranged from entertainment complexes to mixed-use developments, yet each faced the same obstacle: location. The suburban expansion that once fueled Randall Park Mall had moved on. Population density and purchasing power were no longer aligned with the mall's footprint. The math no longer worked. By the mid-2000s, the mall's reputation had shifted dramatically. Once a symbol of success, it was now cited as an example of failure. The phrase "dead mall" entered public vocabulary, describing spaces like Randall Park that had lost their economic heartbeat. Urban explorers and photographers began to take interest, drawn not by commerce, but by decay. In its final years, the mall felt suspended in time. Holiday decorations appeared in half-lit corridors. A handful of stores remained open, their employees working in near isolation. Security patrols echoed through empty halls. The building was still operational, but it no longer functioned as a mall in any meaningful sense. In 2009, the inevitable became official. Randall Park Mall closed its doors permanently. No grand farewell, no final celebration, just locked entrances and silence. The largest enclosed shopping mall in America had become an empty shell, its enormous interior sealed off from the world it once served. Yet closure was not the end of the story. The structure remained, abandoned but intact, looming over the landscape like a monument to excess. Nature, vandalism, and time began their slow work. Windows broke, water leaked, walls deteriorated. The mall was gone, but it refused to disappear. As years passed, the question shifted once again. What do you do with a place this big, this empty, this loaded with memory? And who decides what its ruins should become? After the closure in 2009, Randall Park Mall entered a strange new phase of existence. It was no longer a commercial space, yet it was not truly gone. The massive structure stood abandoned, visible from highways and side streets, an unmistakable reminder of what had once been. For nearby residents, it became part of the landscape, a silent presence that raised uncomfortable questions about the future. With no steady maintenance, deterioration accelerated quickly. Roof leaks allowed water to seep inside, damaging floors and ceilings. Mold spread through unused corridors. Broken glass accumulated near entrances. The fountains that once symbolized modern luxury dried out, their basins filled with debris. Each passing season stripped away another layer of the mall's former identity. Urban explorers and photographers began entering the building, documenting its decay. Their images circulated online, turning Randall Park Mall into a visual symbol of the dead mall phenomenon. Long corridors filled with shadows, abandoned escalators, and peeling paint fascinated viewers around the world. These images sparked debate. Were these places failures, or were they honest reflections of an economic system built on constant growth? Local governments faced increasing pressure. An abandoned structure of this size posed safety risks and attracted illegal activity. At the same time, demolition would be expensive, and redevelopment plans were uncertain. Several proposals surfaced over the years, including industrial reuse, entertainment venues, and mixed commercial spaces. Each plan promised renewal, yet none fully materialized. One attempt involved repurposing parts of the structure for logistics and warehousing. The idea reflected a broader shift in the economy, away from retail and toward distribution and e-commerce infrastructure. In a sense, it was poetic. The mall that had been killed by online shopping would now serve the machines that made online shopping possible. But even this transformation proved limited and temporary. For the community, emotions were divided. Some residents wanted the mall gone, seeing it as a symbol of neglect and decline. Others felt a deep sense of loss, remembering jobs, friendships, and milestones tied to the space. Can a building hold memory, Or do we project our own stories onto concrete and steel? By the mid-2010s, the decision became unavoidable. The cost of preserving or repurposing the mall outweighed the benefits. In 2017, demolition began. Heavy machinery moved in, tearing down walls that had once held dreams of endless consumption. The process was methodical and irreversible. Day by day, the structure that had dominated the skyline was reduced to rubble. The demolition was not just physical, it was symbolic. Randall Park Mall represented an era when size was equated with success, when growth was assumed to be permanent, and when consumption was treated as a cultural foundation. Its destruction marked the final chapter of that belief system in this particular place. After the dust settled, what remained was an open, empty expanse. Where fountains and storefronts once stood, there was now bare ground. The site was cleared, sanitized, and prepared for a different kind of future. Distribution centers replaced boutiques, trucks replaced shoppers, efficiency replaced experience. Yet even in absence, the mall continues to exist in memory. Former employees recall long shifts and holiday crowds. Shoppers remember first jobs, first dates, and weekend rituals. These memories cannot be demolished. They linger, shaping how people understand what was lost and what was gained. The rise and fall of Randall Park Mall is not an isolated story. It is a concentrated example of broader economic and social transformations that reshaped the United States over several decades. Suburban expansion, industrial collapse, shifting demographics, and digital commerce all converged in one massive structure. When the structure fell, it revealed the fragility beneath the promise of permanence. As we step back and look at this story from a distance, one question remains unresolved. Was the mall a victim of forces beyond its control, or a predictable outcome of a system built without an exit strategy? To understand why Randall Park Mall failed, it is necessary to look beyond its walls and into the structure of American consumer culture itself. Shopping malls were never just commercial projects. They were social experiments built on optimism, mobility, and a belief in endless upward movement. Randall Park Mall was designed for a world where people drove more, earned more, and stayed rooted in predictable routines. When those assumptions collapsed, the mall had nowhere to go. The logic of the mall depended on density. Thousands of people moving through the same space every day, spending small amounts of money repeatedly. Once that flow weakened, the entire system began to fail. A single empty store was not the problem. The problem was momentum. Retail thrives on the illusion of abundance and activity. When that illusion breaks, customers feel it immediately, even if they cannot explain why. Randall Park Mall was also a product of extreme scale. Bigger was better, faster, and more impressive. But scale cuts both ways. When decline begins, large spaces decay more dramatically. A small shopping center can shrink and survive. A giant enclosed mall becomes a cavern. Empty corridors feel longer. Silence feels louder. Absence becomes impossible to ignore. There is also the question of adaptation. Some malls reinvented themselves by integrating entertainment, dining, or mixed-use housing. Randall Park Mall struggled to do so because its original design was rigid. It was built for department stores and foot traffic, not flexibility. Retrofitting such a massive structure required capital and confidence that no longer existed. Who would invest millions in a place the market had already abandoned? Another factor often discussed is the role of racial and economic shifts. As suburban boundaries moved and demographics changed, investment followed selective paths. Some areas were continuously upgraded, while others were quietly left behind. Retail decisions are rarely neutral. They reflect perceptions, biases, and risk calculations. Randall Park Mall found itself on the wrong side of those decisions. The mall's story also exposes a deeper contradiction. It was built to last decades, yet depended on trends that changed every few years. Fashion cycles, brand popularity, and consumer habits evolve rapidly. Concrete does not. Once the cultural energy moved elsewhere, the building could not follow. It was fixed in place both physically and historically. Online commerce did not destroy Randall Park Mall by itself, but it removed the final reason for compromise. Why tolerate inconvenience, discomfort, or uncertainty when shopping could be done from a couch? The mall lost its practical advantage first, then its emotional one. When people stopped feeling connected to the space, its fate was sealed. Today, the land where Randall Park Mall stood serves a very different purpose. Distribution centers prioritize speed, storage, and logistics. There are no fountains, no music, no wandering crowds. This transformation reflects a shift in values. Consumption has become efficient, invisible, and isolated. The shared public experience of shopping has largely disappeared. This raises an uncomfortable question. Did malls like Randall Park fail because they were flawed, or because society changed faster than any physical structure could endure? And if so, what does that say about the spaces we are building now? As cities and suburbs continue to evolve, new forms of abandonment are already emerging. Office parks sit half empty, big box stores close. Entire categories of buildings risk becoming obsolete within a generation. Randall Park Mall may be gone, but its lesson remains present, quietly waiting to be acknowledged. The story is not finished yet, because its meaning continues to unfold in how we design, invest, and imagine public space. What replaces a mall when consumption no longer needs a gathering place? When Randall Park Mall disappeared, it left behind more than an empty plot of land. It left a psychological gap. For decades, malls had functioned as neutral public spaces, places where people from different backgrounds could coexist without formal purpose. You did not need an invitation to enter. You did not need to buy anything to belong. The loss of such spaces reshaped how communities interact, often without realizing it. In the years following the demolition, conversations about dead malls grew louder. Urban planners, economists, and sociologists began to treat these spaces as case studies rather than failures. Randall Park Mall became a reference point in discussions about overdevelopment, suburban sprawl, and the limits of growth driven solely by consumption. Its scale made it impossible to ignore even in absence. The emotional weight of the mall's decline is evident in the way people talk about it. Former employees describe the pride of working in what was once considered the pinnacle of retail. Shoppers recall the sense of excitement that came with entering such a massive, enclosed world. These memories are deeply personal, yet they mirror a collective experience shared across the country. How many communities built their identities around spaces that no longer exist? The story also forces a re-evaluation of progress. Randall Park Mall was celebrated as a triumph of modernity when it opened. Climate control, centralized commerce, and architectural spectacle represented advancement. Yet within a few decades, those same features became burdens. Progress, it turns out, is not linear. What seems innovative in one era can become obsolete in the next. There is a certain irony in the mall's final transformation. Where shoppers once wandered, trucks now move with precision. Algorithms replaced window displays. Efficiency replaced atmosphere. The economy did not slow down. It simply changed direction. This shift raises another question. What is lost when convenience becomes the dominant value? Randall Park Mall also highlights the fragility of local economies tied to single institutions. When the mall thrived, it provided jobs, tax revenue, and a sense of stability. When it collapsed, the impact rippled outward. Businesses closed. Employment opportunities vanished. The community was left to adapt without the anchor it had relied on for generations. In many ways, the mall was both a cause and a consequence of suburban life. It required cars, highways, and distance. At the same time, it justified that distance by offering everything in one place. When fuel costs, commuting patterns, and digital alternatives shifted, the model broke down. The mall could not survive without the conditions that created it. Looking back, it is tempting to frame the story as inevitable. But inevitability can be a dangerous comfort. It removes responsibility from decisions made by developers, policymakers, and investors. Randall Park Mall was not a natural disaster. It was the result of choices, incentives, and assumptions. Recognizing that matters because similar choices are being made today. As new forms of development rise, the question becomes whether we have learned anything. Are we building flexible spaces that can evolve, or repeating the same mistakes under different names? Are we creating places for people, or systems for transactions? The silence left by Randall Park Mall invites reflection, not nostalgia alone, but critical thought. If a place once considered indestructible can vanish within a lifetime, what does that say about permanence in modern society? The story continues, not in concrete or steel, but in how we respond to the lessons it offers. And those lessons are still unfolding. Randall Park Mall also reveals how memory and economics often collide. Long after a place stops being profitable, it can remain emotionally valuable. This tension complicates decisions about abandonment and demolition. For investors, the mall became a liability. For many residents, it remained a landmark filled with meaning. The conflict between those perspectives delayed action for years, leaving the structure suspended between past and future. There is a pattern repeated across the United States. A mall opens with fanfare, thrives for a generation, then slowly empties. What makes Randall Park Mall stand out is its scale and symbolism. It was not just another mall. It was once the largest enclosed shopping mall in the nation. When something that dominant collapses, it exposes the vulnerability of the entire system that created it. The architecture itself tells part of the story. Enclosed malls were designed to control experience. Light, temperature, sound, and movement were carefully managed. Outside reality was meant to disappear once you entered. But when stores closed and crowds vanished, that control became unsettling. Without activity, the environment felt artificial and oppressive. A space designed for stimulation became a container for absence. This transformation altered how people related to the building. What was once familiar became uncanny. Hallways felt longer than memory suggested. Ceilings seemed lower. The same features that once impressed now intensified discomfort. The mall did not change physically overnight, but perception did. And perception in retail is everything. Media coverage reinforced this shift. Articles, documentaries, and photo essays framed Randall Park Mall as a cautionary tale. The narrative moved away from success and toward decline. Once a place becomes a symbol of failure, recovery becomes nearly impossible. Reputation, like momentum, is difficult to rebuild once lost. The story also intersects with generational change. Younger generations did not form the same attachments to malls as their parents. Social life moved online. Entertainment became individualized. The mall, as a shared cultural stage, lost relevance. Without emotional investment from new generations, there was no force pushing for its revival. Randall Park Mall's rise depended on predictability, stable jobs, consistent consumer habits, and long-term loyalty to physical brands. Its fall coincided with volatility. Gig work replaced lifelong employment. Brands rose and fell quickly. Digital platforms reshaped attention. The mall was built for stability in a world that embraced acceleration. Even the demolition process carried symbolic weight. Watching walls collapse where memories once lived forced a confrontation with impermanence. Progress often demands erasure, but erasure leaves questions behind. What deserves preservation, and what is allowed to disappear without ceremony? Some argue that the mall deserved its fate, that it represented unsustainable excess. Others see it as a casualty of forces too large to resist. Both perspectives contain truth. Randall Park Mall was ambitious, and ambition carries risk. It was also sincere in its promise to serve a community, a promise it fulfilled for many years. In the end, the mall's story is less about failure and more about transition. It marks the end of a particular vision of public life, one centered on consumption as connection. That vision shaped landscapes, habits, and identities. Its decline leaves space for something new, though what that something is remains unclear. As society searches for new forms of gathering and meaning, the shadow of places like Randall Park Mall lingers. They remind us that environments shape behavior, and that when environments vanish, behaviors must adapt. The question is not whether malls will return, but what kind of spaces will replace them, and whether they will carry the same sense of shared experience or something entirely different. The absence of Randall Park Mall invites a broader reflection on how societies measure success. For decades, square footage, foot traffic, and sales volume were treated as unquestionable indicators of prosperity. Bigger meant better, fuller meant healthier. The mall embodied this logic perfectly. When it collapsed, it challenged the assumption that growth alone guarantees longevity. What replaced the mall is telling. Distribution centers prioritize speed, data, and efficiency. They are largely invisible to the public. There are no benches to sit on, no corridors to wander, no reason to linger. This shift reflects a cultural movement away from shared spaces toward private, individualized experiences. Shopping no longer requires presence. Consumption no longer requires community. Randall Park Mall's story also raises questions about resilience. Could it have survived in a different form if it had been designed with adaptability in mind? Or was its fate sealed the moment it committed fully to a single economic model? Flexibility is now considered essential in architecture and urban planning, yet many existing structures were built before that lesson was learned. The mall also illustrates how nostalgia can distort memory. People often remember Randall Park Mall at its peak, filled with light and activity. They forget the years of decline, the empty stores, the uncertainty. Nostalgia simplifies complex histories. It turns gradual failure into sudden loss. Understanding that complexity matters if we want to avoid repeating the same patterns. There is also an environmental dimension. Massive enclosed malls consumed enormous amounts of energy. Heating, cooling, and lighting spaces of that size required constant resource input. As environmental awareness grew, these inefficiencies became harder to justify. Sustainability, once a marginal concern, became central. The mall, designed for abundance, struggled in an era demanding restraint. The decline of Randall Park Mall mirrors shifts in how people define value. Experiences began to outweigh possessions. Access replaced ownership. Digital interaction replaced physical presence. The mall offered things. The new economy offers services, platforms, and subscriptions. This redefinition left physical retail spaces searching for relevance. Despite this, the fascination with dead malls persists. People are drawn to them not just for aesthetic reasons, but because they represent a pause in time. They are frozen moments where the future imagined by their builders failed to arrive. Randall Park Mall became such a pause, inviting reflection on optimism and its limits. The mall's story also highlights the speed of change. From grand opening to demolition, just over 4 decades passed. In historical terms, that is a brief lifespan for such a massive structure. The pace of economic and cultural transformation has outstripped the durability of our buildings. This mismatch creates ruins faster than ever before. As communities face similar questions today, the challenge is not simply replacing old structures, but rethinking purpose. What do people need from shared spaces now? Safety, connection, creativity, rest? The answers are less obvious than they once were. Randall Park Mall offered certainty. It promised that everything you wanted was inside, waiting. When that promise failed, it exposed how dependent society had become on physical symbols of abundance. Losing them forced a re-evaluation of what abundance actually means. The story continues in the choices being made now, in cities and suburbs everywhere. Each abandoned building is not just an ending, but an opportunity to rethink priorities. And that leads to the final question the mall leaves behind. When the places that defined an era disappear, what replaces the sense of belonging they once provided? Posso prosseguir para a parte 9. Parte 9. Aproximadamente 6,000 caracteres. Randall Park Mall's legacy now exists almost entirely in memory. Photographs and stories passed between people who once walked its corridors. These fragments form a collective archive, one that reveals how deeply physical spaces can shape identity. When those spaces vanish, they leave behind more than empty land. They leave gaps in how people remember themselves. The mall was a stage where everyday life unfolded. First jobs, first dates, casual encounters, routine errands. None of these moments were extraordinary on their own, yet together they formed a shared rhythm. Losing that stage altered how communities experienced togetherness. What replaces spontaneous interaction when shared spaces disappear? In many ways, the mall functioned as a controlled version of public life. It was private property that felt public. This contradiction allowed it to exist as a social hub while remaining commercially driven. When that model collapsed, it exposed the scarcity of truly public spaces in suburban environments. Without the mall, there was little to take its place. The rise and fall of Randall Park Mall also forces a reconsideration of permanence. Modern society builds with the expectation of long-term use, yet operates with short-term thinking. Investment cycles, consumer trends, and technological shifts move faster than concrete can age. The result is a landscape filled with structures outpaced by the systems they were built to serve. There is a quiet lesson in the mall's demolition. It happened without ceremony. No preservation, no memorial, no official acknowledgement of its cultural role. This absence reflects how economic relevance often determines historical value. When profit disappears, memory becomes optional. Yet memory persists anyway. Online forums, videos, and personal accounts continue to resurrect the mall in digital form. In a strange way, Randall Park Mall lives on more vividly online than it did in its final physical years. The internet, which contributed to its downfall, also became the archive that preserved it. The story challenges the idea that decline is failure. Decline can also be information. It reveals limits, dependencies, and blind spots. Randall Park Mall failed not because it lacked ambition, but because it embodied an ambition that no longer matched reality. Recognizing that difference matters. As cities plan for the future, the mall's story offers guidance. Build smaller, build adaptable, build for people, not just profit. These ideas are now widely discussed, yet difficult to implement within existing economic structures. The tension remains unresolved. The mall also raises questions about collective responsibility. Who should manage the afterlife of massive abandoned spaces? Developers, governments, communities. The lack of clear ownership over decline often leads to paralysis. Randall Park Mall sat empty for years because no single actor could justify the cost of action. In the end, the mall's fate reflects a broader cultural shift away from centralized experiences. Life has become fragmented across screens, platforms, and personalized spaces. The mall belonged to a time when gathering was necessary. That necessity has faded, but the human desire for connection has not. The absence left by Randall Park Mall is not just physical, it is symbolic. It represents the disappearance of a shared reference point, a place everyone recognized even if they experienced it differently. As we approach the end of this story, one final thought emerges. If places like Randall Park Mall were mirrors of their time, what do today's dominant spaces say about us? Randall Park Mall ultimately stands as a monument to a belief that once felt unshakable, the belief that scale could guarantee success, that consumption could anchor community, that buildings designed for abundance would naturally endure. For a time, all of this seemed true. The mall worked. It delivered jobs, identity, and a sense of shared experience to thousands of people. But history rarely ends where it begins. The forces that built Randall Park Mall also set limits it could never escape. Economic concentration, suburban dependency, and a rigid physical design left it vulnerable to change. When those changes arrived, they did not negotiate. They simply moved on. The mall's rise was dramatic, but its fall was quiet. There was no single moment of collapse, no defining disaster, just a gradual withdrawal of energy. Fewer shoppers, fewer stores, less light. Decline did not announce itself. It accumulated until there was nothing left to sustain. What remains is not just a cautionary tale about retail, but a broader reflection on how societies build meaning into physical spaces. Randall Park Mall was never only about shopping, it was about belonging. When that function disappeared, the structure lost its reason to exist. The land now serves efficiency rather than experience. Packages move faster than people once did. Transactions occur without interaction. This is not necessarily progress or loss. It is change, but change always comes with trade-offs, and the disappearance of shared spaces is one of them. Looking back, it is easy to romanticize the mall's early years. Bright corridors, constant motion, the feeling that everything was possible inside those walls. Yet nostalgia should not obscure reality. The mall was a product of its time, shaped by specific economic and cultural conditions. When those conditions faded, so did the mall. Randall Park Mall believed itself to be permanent because the era that created it believed in permanence. Growth felt endless. Stability felt guaranteed. The ruins proved otherwise. Nothing built on a single idea can survive forever. Its story resonates because it is familiar. Similar structures rise and fall across different industries, different cities, different decades. The names change, the materials change, but the pattern repeats. Confidence gives way to complacency. Innovation gives way to rigidity. Decline follows. The question is not whether this cycle will continue, but whether it can be interrupted. Can future spaces be designed to evolve rather than collapse? Can communities prioritize connection over scale? Can meaning outlast profit? Randall Park Mall no longer exists in concrete or glass, but it exists as a lesson, a reminder that even the largest empires can fade quietly, that success, when unexamined, contains the seeds of its own undoing. As you reflect on this story, consider the places in your own life that once felt permanent. Which of them are already changing? Which might disappear without warning? And when they do, what memories will remain to tell their story?